What you're looking at is a system that divided people, but they're all still inside the same system. They're reading the same Bible, same scriptures, same verses, same doctrine, same theology, but somehow they walk away with completely different identities, like it's not even the same book. One group believes they hold the only truth, another believes everyone else is blind, but all of them are quoting the same words. Because you've got people using the Bible like it's an African spiritual text, but Africa already had thousands of years of its own spiritual systems, its own sacred traditions, and its own ways of connecting to the divine long before any of this came into the picture. Yet, you barely see many people in that space engaging African spiritual texts with the same seriousness they give European translations or Hebrew interpretations. And then you've got Israelites traveling to Africa searching for identity, but still interpreting Africa through a biblical lens instead of understanding Africa on its own terms. At the same time, most of the teaching, debating, and identity building is happening in America, online, in communities, in arguments, not actually rooted in the land itself. Israel was created in May 1948. That's modern history, a political state formed and recognized in the modern world. But a lot of what's being preached in Israelite teaching is not actually rooted in that reality. It's rooted in interpretation of the Bible. So what you end up with is people building entire identities, arguments, and belief systems off scripture, while calling it Israel, even though what they're really interacting with is a biblical interpretation layered on top of history, geography, and modern nationhood. And because of that, different groups begin to create different versions of Israel in their minds, different identities, different claims, different truths, all from the same text. They're living inside interpretation of a book instead of engaging the real world that book is connected to. And when identity becomes based more on interpretation than reality, confusion isn't an accident. It's the result. That's why it becomes so divided, because it stops being one shared reality and turns into layers of belief systems built on top of a book instead of the actual world itself. And when you really break it down, a lot of both Christian and Israelite interpretations are operating in the same system, different conclusions, but built on the same method, interpreting symbolic and apocalyptic language as if it is always literal identity description. For example, in the Book of Revelation, there is a vision that says, "His head and his hairs were white like wool, his eyes were as a flame of fire, his feet like unto fine brass." But when you break it down in its actual context, Revelation is apocalyptic literature, meaning it is symbolic vision language, not a biological or historical description. White like wool is symbolic imagery often used to represent purity, holiness, or divine glory. Eyes like fire represents judgment, insight, or overwhelming divine presence. Feet like brass represent strength, refinement, and stability. It is not a physical portrait, but a vision communicating meaning through symbolism. So what happens is, different groups read symbolic vision language and turn it into literal identity claims, while others understand it as theological imagery meant to express spiritual truth, not physical appearance. That's where the real divide happens. Not just disagreement, but completely different ways of reading the same text. So both Christianity and Israelite movements often end up in the same cycle, different conclusions, same foundation, but a breakdown in interpretation. And when interpretation replaces shared reality, confusion becomes inevitable. That's why it feels so divided, because it stops being about one world and becomes competing meanings built on top of the same book.